Welcome to the Rotary Club of Hudson. My name is Evan McCauley, president of the club, and we are thrilled to have you joining us today. This meeting broadcast is available on HCTV as well as our Rotary of Hudson YouTube channel. Our club meets weekly at Laurel Lake for breakfast on Wednesday mornings from 7:15 to 8:30 a.m. Come out and join us for a meeting. We'd love to have you as a guest. To learn more about Rotary, our club, and the impact that we are having on the local community and world, please visit rotaryhudson.org. Enjoy the meeting today and be the inspiration.
Good morning, Rotarians, and welcome to another Wednesday morning meeting of the Rotary Club of Hudson. I am Tom Tobin. I'm substituting for Ron Strobel, our Sergeant-in-Arms. He's a little under the weather, so please think of him, and hopefully he'll be back next week. This morning, the invocation, lost the word for a moment, will be handled by Phil Herman.
Good morning, Rotarians. Good morning. This morning's prayer is a prayer of the Mi'kmaq people. The Mi'kmaq people are a First Nation people indigenous to Canada's Atlantic provisions, or Atlantic coast provisions, East Atlantic coast. Creator, open our hearts to peace and healing between all people. Creator, open our hearts to provide and protect for all children of the earth. Creator, open our hearts to respect for the earth and all the gifts of the earth. Creator, open our hearts to end exclusion, violence, and fear among all. Thank you, Creator, for the gifts of this day and every day. Amen.
Amen. Good. And if I could ask Joe Zapotowski to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance and the four-way test.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now if you join me for the four-way test. First, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? Thank you.
Joe, how long have you been a Rotarian?
A while.
And Chris Barker, would you give us a little sunshine this morning?
Sure.
Oh boy.
It's such a beautiful day, just because you're all here. So we're going to sing You Are My Sunshine. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. So please don't take my sunshine away. I'll always love you and make you happy if you will only say the same. But if you leave me for another, you'll regret it all someday. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. So please don't take my sunshine away.
So there's a couple ways of taking. You'll regret it all someday. I guess I never really paid that close attention to words before. I'm sure that we mean it in the most positive way possible. All right. And let's see. Guest next?
Sure.
All right, yes. Chris Barker, please.
Thank you. Good morning again. Okay, so I'm just going to announce one guest with us because others will be up speaking. So if Judge Jill Lanzinger would please stand so we can give her a warm Rotary welcome. Thank you, and she's a member of the Akron Club. Thanks for visiting us today.
Good morning, fellow Rotarians.
Good morning, Evan.
Good morning, community members. If you're joining in on HCTV or checking out our Rotary of Hudson YouTube channel, that's gaining followers every single day. I think we're up to 9 subscribers. So I'm really excited about that. I want to get started with a quick update on a club project that I'm really happy is complete, and that's the club storage cleanup. And really appreciate James Field, Ron Strobel, and Ed Sogan coming out, taking their Saturday morning to take 2 storage units and consolidate it down to 1. That's very organized. So round of applause for those who helped. Continue to check out our website and our calendar of events. That's where we're going to be adding anything that's going on in the club. Continue to share ideas that you have, events that you want to see on there, and we'll add them and we'll get some participation. One of the events that's on there is an upcoming blood drive at Western Reserve Academy that the Interact students are putting together. That's going to be on Tuesday, October 30th from 1 to 7 p.m. over at the Murdo Athletic Center at Western Reserve Academy. So if you're able and willing to give some blood, October 30th at 1 to 7 p.m. Thank you. Next announcement that I have, Jay, can you come up here? Sure. Wonderful. So we're kind of, refreshing our marketing, and Jay is doing such a great job getting our story out to the hub and on Facebook. Please continue to like our stories on Facebook and share them with your friends and family members. Jay and team are doing a great job. And the reason that I called Jay up here today, he handed me a stack of fresh new Rotary Club of Hudson brochures that are hot off the press. So we're proud to have these, and we're going to be using these to grow our membership, to help with other events, and to, again, get our story out there. So Jay, if you want, you could pass around, maybe a few to each table.
Okay. All right.
That'd be wonderful.
And may I say,
yeah.
well, just very quickly, we're putting items on Facebook once or twice a week. Please go in there and like it. You need to be the multiplier. If you like it or share it, then it goes, and we're doing really well. We're up to 117
boosted
fans, shall we say. But please do that. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you, Jay. All right, a couple last announcements, and then we'll get into our program this morning. Thank you to Brexton, who is Betsy Rader's campaign manager, for being with us this morning. Great thing that I heard this morning in getting to know Betsy is that she is a fellow Rotarian. So we're going to give you a big Rotary welcome this morning. But thanks for being with us, Brexton and Betsy. So this isn't my typical gear, let's call it, but it is today. And I'm going to wear this in my office, around town, and to all my client meetings. And I hope that somebody asks me a question. Hey, why are you wearing this bright red shirt? What's going on with that? Well, what's going on with that is today is World Polio Day. Our organization, Rotary International, in 1985 started an initiative to end polio. In the 80s, there were thousands of cases of polio every single day. In 2017, that was reduced down to 22 cases. And only 3 countries in the world have yet to eradicate polio. Our organization has pledged to contribute over $50 million a year to this effort. And you think, 1985, it's been so long. When is this thing going to be gone? Well, even when it is gone, it's not quite gone. There's forensic teams that are out there looking for polio virus in the most remote places, and it lasts for up to, I think, 7 or 10 years. So we've still got a long way to go, I think, but we are this close. So share it with friends and family members. There's stuff out there on Facebook. And also, I mentioned Rotary Direct. If you're able and willing, please contribute today to the polio cause in particular. So let's continue to be the inspiration and share our good work about polio. Another announcement, Gail, we've got some stuff coming up. How's everything going with service learning? Perfect. Gail put together a really awesome event for Rotarians to get involved with Hudson High School students to ring the red kettle and raise some money for the Salvation Army. So round of applause for Gail putting that together and already booking it up. We will have additional opportunities to get out there with the red kettle, and we'll be sharing those dates and availabilities on the club calendar soon. So let's go ahead and get going this morning. I'd like to call up Mayor Dave Basil as we continue our Meet the Candidates month.
Thank you, President Evan. Good morning, fellow Rotarians and guests. Good morning. It is my pleasure to introduce today, as we continue our speaker series for the month, hearing from candidates for elected office, to introduce Betsy Rader. Betsy is the Democratic nominee for Congress in Ohio's 14th Congressional District. That district includes Lake Geauga, Ashtabula, Northern Summit, Portage, and Trumbull, and some of eastern Cuyahoga counties. Betsy has worked as senior counsel at the Cleveland Clinic and at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And as Evan indicated, she is also a fellow Rotarian, a member of the Chagrin Valley Club. So please join me in giving a warm Rotary welcome to Betsy Rader.
Well, thank you for hosting me here today. As he said, I'm a member of the Chagrin Rotary. I meet with them on Tuesday mornings, very similar format to what you have. And so I live in Geauga County. I live in Russell Township, and we've lived there the past 24 years. My husband and I have been married 33 years, and our 3 kids all went to the West Geauga schools, and we're very involved with the Interact program there. That was really important to them when they were in high school. But I was born down in Coshocton, Ohio, which is Appalachia. My dad was a game warden, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom. They had 4 kids, and when I was 9, they divorced. My mom had a high school education and very little work experience before she'd started having babies. So when they divorced, we were plunged into poverty. She was working minimum wage jobs trying to support the 5 of us, and we were living on $6,000 a year. And so I remember what it was like to struggle for the most basic things, you know, scrounging in couch cushions, trying to find change for bread and milk. I remember that I skipped school lunches because I qualified for free school lunches, but the free tickets were orange, and the other kids had blue tickets. And I didn't like it when they made fun of me, so I just didn't eat. And I remember we moved around a lot, trying to find a place where we could afford the rent. And we found this place I really liked. It had a nice school and kids in the neighborhood to play with. And the landlord decided to kick us out because he wanted to give that house to his daughter to live in. And yeah, that was his right. But what I remember is that feeling that we just didn't have a say. We didn't have a voice in what was happening to us. Other people got to call the shots, people with power and resources. And I hated that feeling that we didn't have a say in what happened to us. So I worked really hard. You know, I got a paper route as soon as I could so that I could pay for my after-school activities. And I scooped ice cream at Baskin-Robbins. I demembraned the frozen chicken at Wendy's at 6 in the morning. Yeah, that job will inspire you to get good grades. And fortunately, I did well in school, and I was a National Merit Scholar. I was able to get a scholarship to Ohio State and worked nights and weekends, graduated in 3 years, first in my class, and I was able to get a full financial needs scholarship to Yale Law School. And I wanted to be a lawyer because I saw that as a way to empower myself and to empower my family and to empower other people. And so throughout my life, the Rotary saying of service above self, that's really meant a lot to me. Because when I was in school, people like Rotarians reached out and helped me. I remember they sent me off to a leadership camp. I remember that, the public school teachers would go out of their way to make sure that I had opportunities that I might not otherwise have had. It was the community who knew I had it hard at home, who reached out to me and helped me. So throughout my life, I've always really tried to do the same, and to make a difference in people's lives, and to be an advocate. And so while I was an executive of a small business, I was serving on the board of Geauga United Way. While I was working at Squire Sanders, I was volunteering representing abused children. And I served on the board of Cleveland Legal Aid for 8 years, making sure that low-income people have access to free legal services. People like battered women, they're not entitled to court-appointed counsel, so they need services like that to protect themselves. I went on to actually run Geauga County's Child Advocacy Program for abused and neglected children. And then I went and became senior counsel at the Cleveland Clinic, became interested in healthcare policy and went back to graduate school in healthcare. And then I went on to work at the Innovation Center at Medicare and Medicaid. And we were focused on providing new healthcare delivery systems for some of the sickest people in this country, people with end-stage renal disease on kidney dialysis. And then I had a chance to do something I'd always wanted to do, and now I have my own law firm, and I represent people who've been fired illegally. People who've been fired because they asked for overtime pay, people who've been fired because they took time off to have a baby, people who've been fired just because they got older. And those cases are really heartbreaking, because you'll get somebody who's worked for a company 20, 30 years, and they get walked out the door without even being able to clean out their cube. And when they lose their job, they lose their health insurance a lot of the time. And if you've ever had it happen, or you know somebody that's lost their job when they're in their 50s or 60s, the odds you're going to get another job that pays as well or has benefits, the odds are slim. So I fight for them. And it can feel like David versus Goliath and us against the world, but I do it because justice is on our side, and because everyone deserves a voice and a fair shot. So now I've decided to run for Congress, because I really feel like one of the big problems we have in the country these days is people feel like they don't have a voice anymore. There are these special interests that seem to be calling the shots, and this big money that's in politics these days. And it means that things happen like, net neutrality, the cost of prescription drugs, things that just don't make sense unless you follow the money. And so that is one thing I have really campaigned on during this election season, is that I took a no corporate PAC pledge. I'm not taking that big special interest lobby money, so that I can make sure I don't have a conflict of interest, that I'm really looking out for the people of my district. And a lot of you have been in the business world. If you sit on a board of a business, or if you're in various professions, or you're on a board of a nonprofit, there's there are conflict of interest rules, so that you're not deciding, who gets a contract if you own a portion of the company that you're negotiating with. And I think we ought to have those sorts of rules for people in Congress, so that if they're legislating over an industry, that industry shouldn't be handing them big $5,000 PAC checks to fund their reelection campaigns. I thought today it would be interesting, since I'm with Rotary, and you can certainly go to my website and see my positions on a lot of different issues, but I thought maybe one thing to do would be to take one of my planks of my platform and subject it to the 4-way test. Because I really love this test. I think this test is, in this political environment, a really helpful one. And so, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? And will it be beneficial to all concerned? And in that regard, I'd like to talk about my healthcare policy. I do have this healthcare background, and the thing that really got me thinking about running for Congress was the debate over the repeal of the Affordable Care Act. Because I felt that even though I knew the Affordable Care Act wasn't perfect and that we needed to do more things to make healthcare affordable, that it did a lot of good. You know, it let kids stay on their parents' health plans till they were 26. It made sure pre-existing conditions were covered. It expanded Medicaid. It made sure there was mental health parity in coverage, on and on. And so I was really concerned when the person that is currently in office here had campaigned on repealing it, and I didn't see any plan for what better thing we were going to replace it with. And that's what really drew me into running. And so it's something I've really focused on in the race, is things that we can do that I think we could get bipartisan agreement on. And so the truth about what my position on healthcare policy is that I think that, for one thing, we should be negotiating prescription drug prices. You know, when Part D was passed to Medicare that put prescription drugs into coverage under Medicare, the pharmaceutical lobby got a law included that forbade the federal government from negotiating prescription drug prices. Now, that's kind of crazy. You know, you buy a house, you buy a car, you're in a business and you're buying supplies, you're paying for something, you usually get to negotiate over the price. But clearly, when you talk about follow the money and why are these things happening, the pharmaceutical lobby got Congress to pass a law that it couldn't negotiate prices for prescription drugs. And I'm sure all of you have seen what happens then. You don't negotiate over the price, it goes up, 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 up. And I've been doing these living room meetings all around the district for the past year and a half, and I have to say, when I started, I wouldn't say that prescription drug prices were my very top priority, but as I have held town halls, as I have held listening sessions, as we have knocked on tens of thousands of doors, I hear about it all the time, that people aren't taking their drugs because they can't afford the $200 a month, that they are giving up other things, they're draining. I talked to one family, they had been very comfortably retired and had worked hard all their lives, and the husband had cancer, and the chemotherapy drugs, they were now facing bankruptcy after really doing everything right their whole lives. And so for me, that's something there really ought to be bipartisan agreement on. Why not have the government negotiate prescription drug prices? The other thing that I think there really ought to be able to be bipartisan agreement on is getting rid of these pay-to-delay agreements. Right now, what happens is that these brand name companies can pay off the generic companies to not issue the generic drug that's cheaper. That ought to be illegal. You know, it's just the only point is to force you to keep buying expensive brand name drugs. Congress can take action on that. And why wouldn't we be able to arrive at bipartisan agreement on it? I think the explanation is money in politics. Another prong of my healthcare platform in bringing prices down is to allow people the option of buying into Medicare. Now, contrary to what you may have heard, this is not a government takeover of our health system. It would not kick anyone off of their health care plan. The truth of the matter is it would provide a lower cost option for people if they wanted to buy basically a Medicare insurance plan. Now, why would that be cheaper? It'd be cheaper because I can tell you from having been on the healthcare provider end and having been on the Medicare end, Medicare and the government have a huge negotiating power. They've got a lot of market power to bring the prices down. And they don't have a profit motive. You know, it's not a for-profit company. It's the government here to serve you, and you have a say in what it does. So Medicare has an incentive to bring prices down. It would expand the pool for Medicare, which should bring all the prices down. And it means the private insurance companies would have to compete with Medicare, so that would bring their prices down. So again, why haven't we done that? That was actually originally supposed to be a part of the Affordable Care Act. It lost by 1 vote in the Senate. Health insurance companies don't like the idea of this. They don't want pressure on them to bring their prices down. They're making really nice money right now. And so, again, money in politics. I just always say, follow the money. These are all things that we could be doing to help people in this country. They're all things we all ought to be able to agree on, and they're life and death. So, in terms of the four-way test, is it the truth? The truth of the matter is my platform is a plan that wouldn't cost the taxpayers any money. As a matter of fact, it would save the taxpayers money because, for instance, if we negotiate down the costs of prescription drugs, the government's covering those under Part D and their prices would be cheaper. So we'd save taxpayer money, not spend taxpayer money. Is it fair to all concerned? It is. The only thing that these plans do is cut into the profits of companies that are making very good money off of our health care right now. Will it build goodwill and better friendships? I think that speaks for itself in terms of people being able to live their lives without being afraid that they're one medical emergency away from bankruptcy. And will it be beneficial to all concerned? Again, I can tell you, talking to people whose children, that's the thing I hear about most, is people who are really worried about their children. They have a child with a genetic disorder that they were born with, or type 1 diabetes. I hear them talk about like their wives. They have a wife with multiple sclerosis. You know, these people are really terrified about losing coverage for pre-existing conditions. They're terrified about not having enough money to pay for the care that their family needs. And so living under that cloud of fear and anxiety over healthcare costs, to lift that cloud would definitely be beneficial to all concerned. So for those reasons, I ask that you consider voting for me on November 6th. I think that we can build a better America. Thanks.
All right. Yeah, it seems to be working. Thank you for coming today. My question involves attack advertising. And in a commercial that you approved, you talk about Dave Joyce as being double talk Dave. He's a man that says one thing, does another. You can't trust a word he says. And in a commercial that Dave Joyce approved, he calls you a rabid liberal who's going to cost the taxpayers $32 trillion. That's trillion with a T. And your race is not unique. The same thing is happening with the U.S. Senate race, with the governor's race, and all the other state offices. And I understand I'm a political science major. I understand the science behind attack advertising. But if all you hear for like 60 or 90 days before an election is attack advertising, and I, the average voter, conclude that you're all a bunch of scoundrels. You can't trust Dave Joyce. You're going to cost me money. Why should he even come to the polls?
Well, you should come to the polls because that's how a democracy works. And, for the month of September, my ads, Dave Joyce had not started attacking me yet, and my ads were all actually about me and what I want to do. There was an ad that was me on my bike talking about the fact that I have a pre-existing condition, that I have qualifications at Medicare and Cleveland Clinic, and talking about wanting to make sure that everybody has coverage for pre-existing conditions. My next ad was me talking with a group of voters about prescription drug prices and the importance of addressing the cost of prescription drugs. I have not seen any ads yet where my opponent actually says what he's for or what he's accomplished. But what started was he started, these series of ads that have been given 4 Pinocchios by the Washington Post as being completely untruthful, and that have also been called out by the Akron Beacon Journal and the Plain Dealer for being completely untruthful. I, on the other hand, have put out ads as we've approached the election hoping to let voters know what the truth is about his voting record, because a lot of people don't have time to do the research. As a matter of fact, when I first started running, I was not nearly as aware as I am now about how much I disagree with some of the votes he's made. So, for instance, he promised to protect Medicare when he ran for office before. But then, in fact, the reason why I call it Double Talk Dave is that he voted for the Ryan budget that would cut Medicare and turn it into a private voucher system. The fact of the matter is he voted 31 times to repeal the Affordable Care Act, and now he can't articulate what they would replace it with. And I think that's a really important thing for people to know, that somebody voted 31 times to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, 31 times to get rid of coverage for pre-existing condition, 31 times to not have children be able to be covered on their parents' plan till they're 26, and yet had nothing in mind to replace it with. And we've had 2 years to see what that replacement would be, and we haven't seen it. So I'm sorry that, it does, it comes across as negative, but the point is to help educate people, and you've only got 30 seconds to do it in. And unfortunately, it's really tough to have an intelligent, informed conversation in 30-second bites that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to put on the air. And I wish we had more forums like this, and I wish that Mr. Joyce would show up for the various League of Women Voter forums, et cetera, so that we could have a really, thoughtful discourse. But, the City Club, for instance, decided not to even hold a debate this year because there was an incumbent, and they said incumbents don't like to debate. And so it makes it really hard to help inform people of what your differences are and talk about it in a nice way that you would like to talk about it when you can't even, have a debate with somebody.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Maybe.
Well, real quick question, just to follow up on.
Sure.
So on the issue of whether your plan would cost this huge amount of money, what do you say directly?
It wouldn't cost anything. My plan is not a single-payer system. It wouldn't take anyone off of any of their plans, and people would buy a Medicare option just like they buy anything else for insurance. It's just it would be a lower cost because the government has this negotiating power and this incentive to bring down costs that the private sector insurance companies don't have. So the fact of the matter is, not only would it not cost $32 trillion, it would cost nothing, and it would actually bring down taxpayer costs by bringing down the cost of prescription drugs.
I was going to ask whether you had heard what I heard last night. I sometimes listen to Rachel Maddow, and she usually doesn't lie online or in front of the camera. So what she said last night was that somehow the Republicans have found a way to remove the pre-existing conditions protection from the current reality.
Yeah.
Do you want to comment on that?
Sure, absolutely, and that's another basis for the double talk. So what they did, the thing with and this gets a little wonky, but we have a few minutes. So how the Affordable Care Act worked, it was a big compromise, because we were trying to get everybody on board to pass it. And so to get pre-existing conditions to be covered, what you needed to do is expand the risk pool. Because if only sick people and people with pre-existing conditions sign up for insurance, it's very expensive for the insurance companies. They don't want to cover them. That's why they used to exclude people with pre-existing conditions. They're expensive, and the insurance companies want to make money. So, to compromise with the insurance companies and expand the risk pool, what they did is had this, what people call the individual mandate, which required healthy people to also buy insurance. It required everybody to buy insurance. That way you have a nice, big, broad risk pool instead of just sick people with pre-existing conditions buying insurance. And this is how they made it palatable to the insurance companies, was by requiring this insurance coverage for everyone. Now, of course, people latched onto that. It's an individual mandate. It's taking away your right not to have health insurance, neglecting the fact that, if people don't have health insurance and they go to the hospital, there's a law that forbids us from letting them die in front of the emergency room. The hospital has to provide care. And believe me, that care price gets passed on to all of us. That care doesn't just become charity and evaporate as a cost. So anyway, so they required everybody to have health insurance, and that allowed us to cover pre-existing conditions in the law. And then when they failed to repeal the Affordable Care Act last year, it lost by 1 vote in the Senate. They proceeded, and President Trump has bragged about this, they proceeded to pass laws that gutted the Affordable Care Act. And what they did in the tax bill, which my opponent was all in for, what they did in the tax bill is they took away the requirement that people buy insurance. And then very predictably, what has happened now is there is a federal lawsuit that I think it's 26 Republican attorneys general filed. And that lawsuit says that it's unconstitutional to require the insurance companies to cover pre-existing conditions now that they took away that requirement for everyone to buy insurance. And I am told that in the federal oral arguments, and the Trump administration chose not to defend the law. So the Trump administration's lying down and letting this lawsuit go forward, saying that it's unconstitutional now for the ACA to require that pre-existing conditions be covered. And I am told that in the arguments, the oral arguments, the judge sounded very inclined to say that it's unconstitutional to cover pre-existing conditions now. And so, and you heard, again, President Trump bragged when they passed that this would destroy the Affordable Care Act, that they basically had just repealed the Affordable Care Act. And so there is a really significant danger that the pre-existing condition coverage is going to be held unconstitutional and is going to go away when that judge rules. And I believe he's indicated he's going to wait till after the midterms to do that, of course. So we won't know the answer when we're voting. But it's really alarming because, again, so many people have pre-existing conditions. Oop.
Is it on?
There you go.
Betsy, I'm a physical therapist, and by the way, which is an evidence-based way to fight the opioid crisis. But
interesting.
I can't treat people because insurance companies are incentivized to deny benefits. So I have people that come with pretty significant functional limitations. After maybe 3 sessions with me, the insurance says, well, we're not going to authorize any more visits. They buy plans that have 60 visits per calendar year of physical therapy, but the managed care companies say, no, we're not going to pay any more than 3 visits. And I say, well, like this person can't squat yet, or they can't do what they need to do. No, we don't pay for that. United Healthcare makes $37 billion a year in profit, but we can't get people functional mobility. How can we require that they pay for what people bought without making the government control all of it and still allow them to make a profit? I'm not against profit, but when you buy a service and you can't get it after you paid for it, I don't know how to change that.
Yeah, and anybody knows that, any type of insurance you have, be it home insurance, car insurance, health insurance, actually getting the benefits you're paying for is often very challenging. And in health care, I think it's particularly difficult because, having, in addition to having had a spinal fusion where I was in debilitating pain, I've had my colon's been obstructed. I had to have a foot of my colon removed. We're often very ill when we're dealing with these issues. And, you're often not in a position where even if you normally could fight with the insurance company, you're not in a position to do that. And so they hold even more power than they do in other situations. And that's why, to the extent that, there's a group of people who really, I think, is trying to make the argument that there's no role for government. All government is bad. And this is where government is there, is to protect people, to step in with its power when people don't have the resources or the ability to do that. And so, I think it's important to stop this vilification that government can have a place in helping people, because what you're talking about right there is where you should have government enforcement agencies that a person could go to and lodge a complaint. And then instead of it being the burden of your patients or you, I hear from a lot of healthcare providers who are spending a lot of their time being patient advocates, and what it should be is I would equate it to what I do as an employment lawyer. We're supposed to have the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, to help people navigate the laws and enforce the laws when they're violated. It could be the same thing with healthcare. You could have the equivalent there of an ombudsman. At a hospital, they'll have an ombudsman's department. Well, you could have a government ombudsman that would have teeth, because that's the problem right now, is all of these regulatory agencies are just being defunded and are half empty, and none of the laws anywhere are really being enforced now. So if you had an ombudsman, a patient ombudsman, maybe they could pick up the cudgel for those people and make sure that they're getting the benefits that are being paid for.
Yeah, for at least the last 40 years, and increasingly in recent years, politicians on both sides of the aisle are very, very reluctant to talk about cost control, and increasingly happy to cut taxes because it sells at home very well. We have a budget deficit that's growing to the extent that we're soon going to be like Italy, and I hope nobody takes offense to that. But yet the two biggest expenses that we've got in this government are Social Security and Medicare, of which I benefit from both. But they are also considered untouchable, and they can't be untouchable, ultimately, if we're to get the deficit under control. If the deficit's not under control, we're doing a disservice to our grandchildren. Where do you sit on that?
Well, I think if we cared about our grandchildren, we would not have passed the most recent tax cuts. They have already totally skyrocketed the deficit, and it gave a permanent tax cut to the very wealthiest corporations, with again the idea that would somehow trickle down, where what could have happened in that tax cut, if you really thought the economy needed stimulated, is you could have targeted it, for instance, to small and medium-sized businesses that are creating jobs, and rewarded people with incentives when they're creating jobs, which really would grow the economy. And so, Medicare and Social Security, for instance, just yesterday on NPR, there was an interview with me and with the incumbent, and he said that we're going to have to cut Social Security and Medicare going forward to make up for these tax cuts. And I know in the past, what he's voted for instance, is to increase the age for retirement. And to me, that is that is just unrealistic. It's spoken by somebody who already has a lifetime pension from his last job and who has a desk job. There are a lot of people who can't work past the age of 68. And again, I tell you, so many people get fired in their 50s and 60s and can't get another job. The idea that now they would have to wait until they're even older to qualify for Medicare and Social Security, I just don't think that's realistic. And so, one thing that I think we can do, for instance, is lift the cap on paying into Social Security. Right now, after you you earn, I forget the exact number, it's like $160,000, you're not paying into Social Security anymore. You know, one way to increase revenue would be to lift that cap. I've got friends, I live in Russell Township, and I have friends who make that sort of money, and they're not like waiting to pay bills until they hit that number and get that extra money in their paycheck toward the end of the year. I think they'll be okay. And you know, it's just a fact of the matter is that, you know, if we want government and we want to provide, you know, Social Security and Medicare have made a huge difference to this country, to keeping older people out of bankruptcy. Older people are still the most frequent filers of bankruptcy. So the idea that we are going to cut Social Security and Medicare while giving tax relief to the very wealthiest, I just don't think that's the solution. But I agree with you that we should be responsible with the budget. And I think that, you know, when they passed this tax cut and they just said, well, somehow it's going to pay for itself, you know, I think there needs to be more thoughtful planning. Because there were predictions at the time it was passed that it wouldn't pay for itself, and we are seeing that, in fact, it is not paying for itself. So somebody's got to pay, and I agree it's going to be our grandchildren.
Thank you.
Two quick questions, and I'm a little ignorant when it comes to politics, so forgive me for asking, but when Obama took the White House back in whatever, 2008, was it? What was our deficit at that point, and what was it when he left? I'm just trying to state facts. I don't remember.
I believe it went down.
No.
Didn't it?
No.
I thought. Oh, the budget deficit went down. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
There was less deficit when he left.
Yeah.
When he came.
Yeah, I think it went from 5 trillion to 19 trillion, if I'm correct.
You know, I'd have to pull it up, but I'm pretty confident that the budget deficit went down.
Okay, what is it now?
We'd have to pull up the data on that.
What is it now, ballpark? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, those are different things.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
So the national debt
and the
budget deficit are two different things.
The national debt.
You know, I honestly don't have those numbers at my fingertips.
And then when we talk about the tax cuts, only because I'm a CPA being counted, a lot of people know that. And I know the rates took effect January 1st, 2018. And I realize when people are saying that, okay, fine, people adjusted their W-4 and blah, 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 so there's not as much money going to the government. But how do you know all that's, you know, happening now when tax returns don't get filed until 2019? The new 21% tax rate didn't take effect until January 1st, 2018, and even later for fiscal year and C Corps. How do we know that now that all that is affecting, you know, the debt and all that when we have
The CBO, the government agencies are releasing that information.
Based on, because nobody's filed tax returns yet, and there's been no true savings at the individual level.
Well, the data comes from the Congressional Budget Office that does both current and forecasting, but that's what the deficit is at right now.
So that's a lot of it's forecasting, basically.
Well, no, it's forecasting, and it's also what the deficit actually is right now.
Okay. I'm just trying to educate myself. I wasn't trying to direct anything.
Pat? I was recently reading an article that for the first time in healthcare providers, there's more administrators than there are healthcare providers. So in order to control healthcare costs, it also has to be on the provider side that when we go to the hospital, that we're paying for our physicians and our nurses and our techs that are taking care of us, and not for people in administration. Now, it might be heresy in Northeast Ohio to talk about hospital administration, but just funding it and coming up with the mechanism isn't the right side too. We also have to look at the control costs and who and where the profit is going in on the healthcare provider side as well.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I mean, healthcare, as somebody famously said, healthcare really is complicated. And the things that I've talked about today are just the things that I think are so basic and obvious that we ought to be able to very quickly get bipartisan agreement. But you're right, what we really have to look at ultimately is not just what does insurance cost, it's why are actual healthcare costs going up so much. And part of the problem that you have right now is that the health, when you think about how our free market economy normally works and how you usually negotiate when you're a business. The problem we have right now is that the hospitals are negotiating with the insurance companies over prices. Obviously we don't really get to negotiate or wouldn't even know how to begin to say what should a heart transplant cost. So you've got healthcare providers negotiating with insurance companies over cost. But neither of those parties is actually incentivized to keep the cost down. Because neither of them is ultimately paying the cost. The health insurance company doesn't really mind paying the hospital a lot, because the insurance company is just going to pass it on to you as the employer and as the patient. And so we've got, in that area, we don't have a typical free market economy. We don't have classic capitalism. We don't have parties bargaining with equal bargaining power and knowledge and incentives to keep costs down. And so that's why you're getting what you got. Is just constantly exponentially escalating costs. And so you're right, there's a whole lot that needs to be done. And of course, part of the reason why you need so many administrators is because of a lot of, like what I watched while I was in that field was the electronic medical record. And just the cost of implementing the electronic medical record, the amount of time it takes doctors to use that record. I'm afraid that the move to that and how quickly that was done really had some unintended consequences that were negative in terms of costs and time. And so that's one thing when people want to make really big moves. I think it's one reason why I kind of like incremental approaches to problems, is because sometimes you have unintended consequences like increased administrative costs that you didn't really realize you were going to have.
You mentioned the idea of allowing people to buy into Medicare. Can you give us kind of, which you said would be, I think, less expensive. Can you give us an idea of how that would compare to what perhaps it would cost for me to buy health insurance, from the way it currently is? So how much savings are we talking?
I think it could be very significant, and of course I don't know what you're currently paying, but you can look at the data at the price per patient for Medicare and do a comparison and see that it could be as much as half the cost.
Because I want to say, like, for families with our company right now, we pay for all of the entire health insurance thing. It's like 20 for a family. It's like probably $25,000.
Wow.
And I thought I saw some statistics in the Wall Street Journal that said for most companies it's in the low 20s or something.
Yeah, it's, when I meet with small business owners, it's an extraordinary factor for them. And that's why I really think, if we could get significant reform in this area, it can really help with business growth if we could lift those costs off of small businesses.
Well, I was just going to sort of in an answer to that. I think if you work for a company that's subsidizing it, then probably it's less expensive to stay on that company plan. I could tell you one time when I was between jobs, before I was working now, I did the COBRA where you're funding the entire amount.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're an individual funding it for yourself, that's quite a high amount.
Good point.
But probably the savings is really for those people who are not on a company plan.
Good point. Yeah, I'm sorry. I should have clarified that.
Right. So but looking from an employee's perspective, it's probably that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And your point's also right, that it would be open to everybody, so. Thank you.
I'll give you a lesson.
Thank you, Betsy. I tell you what, George, you had a great question there. Why I love this Meet the Candidates month. It's amazing how we're able to get to know these folks in a different light other than ads and Facebook. So round of applause for Dave Basil for coordinating all of this. That's wonderful. So we're going to have our Rotabuck here. I have one quick challenge for everyone, though. I'm going to stick with World Polio Day here quickly. When they drop the vaccines in the mouths of children, when they're in the villages, what they do is they take purple nail polish or a purple marker, and they mark the pinkies of the children so that they're able to understand who's got the vaccine, who hasn't. So there's a lot of Rotarians that are doing events today around that. So go home. If your spouse or partner has some purple nail polish, pull it out, put it on your pinky and put it on hers. For the women out there, if you've got purple nail polish, do the same. If you don't, stop on your way home. And
Bring yours next week. Bring yours next week.
I've got all day. I'm going to get on it, Liz. Thank you. All right, so we had a lot of fun with Rotabuck last week, Pat Shear and Catherine Sines. So the jackpot's probably not too big this morning, but we'll go ahead and draw the winning ticket here. Betsy, could you do the honors for us?
Say ours is up to like $1,300 right now. There you go. 3817724.
What was that again?
3817724.
All right.
Doug McDowell, the big winner. Payout $12.
I'm going to donate that to the
Polio, yes. Let's get the big jackpot. Oh, sorry.
I didn't win last night.
Thank you everyone for being here. Have a great week and be the inspiration.